Welcome back to the Rich Dad Real Estate Show, where we talk about the good news and bad news of real estate, hosted by yours truly, Jaren Sustar. So I am hosting a free training coming up on Thursday, October 17th, teaching you all about how to buy profitable real estate deals using other people's money. So we're opening up 2 different slots, 7 p.m. Eastern and 9 p.m. Eastern. Our platform can only hold so many people, so if you want to make sure you get a spot, go sign up today. We put a link in the show notes so that you can get registered. Today, I am honored to have my good friend and employee of mine and one of the best people that I personally know on this planet, Ryan Burnham, on the show. Ryan lives in what I like to pronounce as Minnesota, and as a real estate investor specializes in house hacking, although he has leveraged that to branch into other forms of real estate investing that have led to increased cash flow over time. Ryan started learning about real estate investing in 2018, realizing it was the path that would help give him more flexibility in his schedule and ultimately financial freedom. And what do you know? Here we are just a few 6 years later, and he's done it. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jaren, it's a pleasure being here. Thanks for having me on.
So I'm excited to dive into your journey. I know it just from working together and knowing you as a person. And so it's going to be cool to be able to unfold this for the listeners today. But I want to start by diving into house hacking, because house hacking is something that you did, and it's something that a lot of new real estate investors do to get their feet wet into the real estate investing industry. And then if they leverage it correctly, which we're going to talk about with what you did, it can really help grow and expand their portfolio and lead to that flexibility, time, and financial freedom. So what is, on the basic level, house hacking?
Yeah, house hacking is a fantastic strategy. On a basic level, what it is it is just buying a property to own as a primary residence and then renting out the additional spaces to create income. So it could be as simple as buying a single family house, renting out the extra bedrooms. It could be buying a property with a mother-in-law unit, whether it's attached or detached, what we call ADU, which is an additional dwelling unit, to buying a small multifamily property, duplex, triplex, fourplex, and it's just the concept of buying a property and renting out the additional spaces to generate revenue to lower or eliminate your housing cost.
Now, I think when people hear renting out spaces in their house, they immediately go to Airbnb or Vrbo, because that's the culture that we're in today. Those are big names. Do these have to be what we would consider short-term rentals, or can you do it across the broad spectrum of long-term, maybe midterm, short-term, mixing all of them in?
That's another thing that's fantastic about house hacking, is it gives you so much flexibility as to what you can do with that property. So you can use any back-end rental property strategy with house hacking. Could be short-term rentals, could be midterm rentals, could be long-term rentals. I personally have used my other units that I've house hacked as midterm rentals and long-term rentals, but you just have a ton of flexibility with that. And that's just one of the many things that is awesome about house hacking.
So think back to 2018 and your story. What got you motivated in real estate? And then what made you choose house hacking as that first strategy?
Yeah, for me, I think like a lot of people, I was looking for a way to escape the rat race. I was in a high income field. I was around a lot of people that made great money, and I had seen a lot of people be very irresponsible with that high income. And what that creates for so many people is just people chasing their tail like a dog, basically. You make that high income, you go out and you get a massive house, have the biggest house payment that you can get approved for. You go out and you get that $1,000 a month truck payment, and then you're having to stay at that job that you don't like. So I was looking for a way to get flexibility and freedom so that I could use that high income job to buy my way out of it, essentially. And house hacking was just the most simple way for me to go about that. To get that freedom and that flexibility that I was looking for in the shortest amount of time possible.
I love that. Can you share your first house hacking experience? How did it evolve? How did you find the property, the type of property, types of loan, and maybe breaking down, outside of just what you did, some other examples of what other people could do that maybe didn't line up exactly to your story, but they can go execute in their market and in their lives?
Yeah, for me, I was very excited and very enthusiastic about going out and finding that first property. So I worked with an agent. That agent didn't have to do a whole lot of heavy lifting, though, because I was going out and looking for properties very actively myself, including off market. My first house hack was a property with a mother-in-law unit, and the basement, it's a split level home. The upper unit had its own setup up there, 2-bed, 1-bath. The lower unit was the same, 2-bed, 1-bath. The prior owner rented it out as a duplex. He did not have a washer and dryer in the upstairs unit, so I added that for the tenant up there. I moved into the lower unit, and I found that property actually on Craigslist of all places. That's something I kind of forget about sometimes, that I found that on Craigslist, a for sale by owner. Met that owner out there. It was during early 2021 when everyone is placing 30, 40 grand, over asking. I placed an offer on it, didn't have to go over asking on it, and was able to lock up and secure that property. And I lived in the lower unit for a little over a year before I moved out, and then rented out the property in full. One thing that I will say people can go out and do today that may be different than from what I had done is go out and find properties, especially if you're single. I cannot recommend this enough, to use the rent by the room strategy. In today's market, it is sometimes more difficult to find a small multifamily property that is going to perform as well as people want. But if you pivot to rent by the room strategy, you can just you open up the door to so many more opportunities.
What's your message to folks who say, yeah, Ryan, but I don't want a roommate? How do you overcome that?
For people that don't want to get a roommate, I think that for people with families, that's very understandable. And I totally get that. And I can relate with that, not wanting to do that. I think for young people and even just anyone that's single, I think that is an incredible way to secure your financial future. You have to have the mindset that you aren't going to necessarily do it forever. People think when they do that you have to do it forever. You do it. If you don't like it, then just stop doing it after a year. And you've saved so much money in that time, and it secures your future in that you can go out and buy another property. You have savings so that if you have instability with your job, you have saved that money. That's another thing you need to do, is not fall into the trap of spending more as you make more. You need to be saving that money as you're doing that, but you don't have to continue to do it. So just go into it with the mindset that it's a temporary sacrifice for something that's going to secure your future. And for me, I've always had the mindset that I will house hack for 3 to 5 years to set that foundation. And then moving forward, at some point, I won't house hack. But for me, it is well worth it with my current seasonal life. And for people that have that flexibility, I can't recommend house hacking enough in general, especially rent by the room strategy, if they are willing to do that in their seasonal life.
Everybody's looking for the perfect life with as least friction as possible and make it as smooth sailing as they possibly can. The problem is when you set out on a journey to be successful or reach financial freedom, escape the rat race, me and you both know this, Ryan, it is hard. It's not easy. And so you come to this crossroads. And my dad used to tell me this all the time when I was a kid. He said, you can play now, but you're going to have to pay later, or you can pay now so you can play later. And so if you're sitting here listening to this and you're like, okay, I understand that buying a house and then having roommates would drop my monthly costs, is going to help me build wealth, it's going to help me get started in real estate, but a roommate's non-negotiable for me. And I would say, well, if that's the case, you may have a hard time reaching financial freedom and escaping the rat race if you don't like uncomfortable situations. There's a reason people who are financially successful are called 1%ers, because 99% of the people in the world don't want to do what it takes to get there. And so if you're not just talking about it and you actually want to be about it, you're going to have to step across that line of uncomfortable and do some things that you don't want to do to get to where you want to go. So can you talk about your goal when you started house hacking? Was it to hit a certain cash flow number, or was it more so, hey, let me just get into this asset that is going to appreciate over time? If I make some cash flow, great. But the main thing is I can get into this asset, and then these other people can actually pay my mortgage, or at least part of my mortgage for me. And then we'll see what happens down the road and see if we can't leverage that additional cash flow or additional equity to keep this puppy going.
Yeah, I had the long-term perspective of building wealth through real estate over time. I know that no matter what the numbers look like in the short term, and obviously you always want the numbers to make sense in the short term, I knew that buying assets and holding on to them over time was going to be beneficial to me in the long term. In the short term, my immediate goal was just to lower my housing expense. Like a lot of people, I was renting at the time prior to buying my first property, and rent is not cheap, and I wanted to save on rent. And by buying my first house hack, I was able to lower my housing costs to about $200 a month. So a lot of people go into this with the mindset that if I do not eliminate my housing cost, it's not worth it. And I think people need to change their perspective with what a property is going to cost you if you just buy it and don't house hack, or what it's going to cost you to continue to rent, which in many markets across the country right now is going to be $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 to live in a home. if you can lower that, even if you're not paying zero, or even if you're not at that exact number that you want, if you can lower it, instead of paying $3,000 a month for your mortgage payment, you're paying $800 a month. I would consider that a win. So my goal was just to lower my housing expense so that I could increase my savings and then snowball that into my next property, which is what I did. And one thing that Robert is really big on, that sometimes people disagree with, but I think he is spot on with, is that housing, that buying a primary house is a liability in the short term. It is, of course, buying a home is going to be beneficial to you long term in terms of building wealth for your primary residence, but it is a short-term liability. When you rent, you have so much more flexibility. Flexibility to move, flexibility if you have instability with your job. You do not have as much flexibility when you buy a home, and it's another payment that you have. And it is a liability in the short term, no matter how beneficial it is in the long term. And house hacking flips that on its head. It provides you the opportunity to turn your primary residence into an income generating revenue source for you, which people don't think about. And I think Robert's spot on with that. And house hacking just allows you to, create another source of revenue from your primary residence.
You're spot on with that. Robert talks about it all the time, about how a house is a liability because it costs you money every month. Like an asset shouldn't cost you money every month. It should make you money, and then it's going to appreciate in value over time. So with a personal home, you get that appreciation, but man, it's eaten away in that expense column. And so to your point, if we can bring somebody in to help pay our mortgage or maybe pay the entire thing for us, then we have just turned our personal home from a liability into an asset. And then, as me and you know, what started as, okay, well, maybe I cut my mortgage from $1,000 a month to $200, or maybe I went from $800 a month to I'm not having to pay anything. Well, what happens is over time, especially if you look at data, rents go up. And so where maybe you were just breaking even, which is still amazing, not having to cost you anything to have a home. Well, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, rents have gone up. Well, now you're actually cash flowing on that property, and it's turned into a very, very, very nice asset that then eventually allows you to expand over time. What types of properties do you think are best suited for house hacking?
Any property, for the most part, can work for house hacking. And that's another thing that's awesome about it. You can buy a 2-bedroom condo and rent out the other bedroom, and you're house hacking. You're lowering your housing expense through that. For most people, especially if you are not wanting to move around a lot, like a lot of house hackers do, they'll buy a property, use an owner-occupant loan, whether it's an FHA loan, conventional loan, VA loan, live in one unit for a year, and then move on. But if you don't want to do that and you are looking at it as, I'm going to live in this home for the next 3+ years, I would say a small multifamily property is going to be ideal for that. And that is going to be dependent on where you're at in your season of life. An up-down duplex, which is what I live in, there are pros and cons to that compared to a side-by-side. If I had a bunch of kids like you, I would instead have a side-by-side duplex, ideally with the garages in the middle, so that there's another additional layer of soundproofing between the two units. So any property can work for house hacking, but if you are looking at it as, I'm going to occupy this house for a long time and you don't know where you're going to be in your life a few years down the road, I would buy a property that is more suitable for you in the long term, which is going to be a small multifamily property for most people.
We'll be right back with Ryan Burnham talking all things house hacking.
Are you worried about your financial security in these unprecedented times? If you are, the next minute could profoundly impact your financial security. Imagine waking up to find the economy has plunged and your portfolio has plummeted 30 to 45%, while banks are in turmoil, holding your money hostage while waiting for FDIC intervention. Where would you turn? For many, this may sound like fiction, but it's a stark reality for those that have money on the line. Recently, America's awoke to both the NASDAQ and the Dow, plummeting over 1,100 points each and triggering a frenzy of sell-offs. History shows us how a single event can crash the market, like the dot-com bubble of 1999, the subprime mortgage crisis of 2008, and the pandemic of 2020. But today, we're facing multiple bubbles: commercial real estate, stock, bonds, and banks. Combined with the relentless inflation, the threat of global recession, the specters of war, and you have the perfect storm. The consequences could be catastrophic, plunging us into unprecedented crisis. America is sliding in the age of discord, with trust in institutions collapsing and the democratic norms unraveling. The quality of life for Americans has declined. Wealth is concentrated among the rich, while the median American family income stagnates, creating a dangerously top-heavy social pyramid. Moreover, hostile countries like Russia, China, and Iran are working to destroy the U.S. dollar. Gold is a no-matter-what store of wealth that you need. That's why Robert has been such an advocate of gold, and he trusts Allegiance Gold. Allegiance Gold is ready to help you incorporate physical gold as part of your portfolio and protect it against economic uncertainty. Visit protectwithrobert.com today to learn how you can qualify for up to $5,000 in free silver with a qualifying investment. Or give them a call at 844-3-ROBERT. Remember to mention Robert and Kim sent you when you contact Allegiance Gold. Secure your IRA or 401k today with Allegiance Gold. Visit protectwithrobert.com or call 844-3-ROBERT.
Welcome back to the Rich Dad Real Estate Show, where we talk about the good news and bad news real estate. I'm your host, Jaren Sustar, and we're having a great conversation with Ryan Burnham. So, Ryan, before the break, we were talking about the different types of properties that make good house hacking units. But when we look at getting financing for those particular properties, what are some strategies that potential investors can explore to make that happen? Because there's a lot of great opportunity to get to the house hacking space when it comes to a financing standpoint.
Yeah, there are a lot of fantastic financing opportunities for any property that you want to house hack. One common loan product that people will use is an FHA loan. You can buy properties with as little as 3.5% down when you use FHA loans. One of the downsides to FHA loans is you have to either refinance or sell your property to get out of your PMI payment if you're using a low down payment. So that's something to keep in mind. There are also conventional loan products where you can use low down payments to acquire a property to house hack. I personally, on my first property, I had a mother-in-law unit. I personally used a conventional loan with 5% down for that. And if you are buying a non-multifamily property, I would recommend that from the start so that you can save your FHA loan. So I was intentional with that so that I could go out and use an FHA loan on a larger property and lock in that ability to still only have to put 3.5% down on my next property, which I knew was going to be a bigger property. So yeah, there's conventional loan products where you can put as little as 3 to 5% down. FHA loans, typically 3.5% down. If you're a veteran, VA loans, I believe you can get in with 0% down, which I would recommend any veteran that has served our country to explore that option.
And what is amazing about all these products is you can go buy a single family property, a duplex, a triplex, a quadplex, and I'm pretty sure, you got to read into it a little more, with the FHA, you can buy larger multifamily now, but traditionally you could always buy from a single family up to a quadplex using these loan products. And so we're able to get in, whether it's conventional 5% down, FHA 3.5%, or VA 0, at very low cost on the front end with the down payments. And then now we just let those tenants that we bring in who are hacking our house to pay off the mortgage for us, and we're building that equity over time, and we are lowering our mortgage and increasing our cash flow day by day. So let's go in a different direction, talking about what it actually looks like when we get tenants in place. What does that management process look like? What have you learned along the way? And what can you tell our listeners to put in place to make sure that that is the smoothest process when it comes to managing those tenants who are living in your home?
Yeah, that's something you always have to keep in mind when you're house hacking, is that you are living next to these tenants and guests. So you need to set expectations clearly up front. I can be a people pleaser. And with that, I was pretty chatty and just, and would talk with my tenants when I saw them, particularly, and it was more, I would say, of something that I need to be aware of when I bought a fourplex, because now all of a sudden you have 3 different people. When I come home from work, they see you outside, they'll chat with you. So you just need to set expectations clearly when you are living in the same property as your tenants, so that they don't take advantage of that and they're not bugging you for every little thing. But as it pertains to a property management standpoint, have a very thorough lease in place and just be by the book with everything that you do, and be thorough with everything that you do, so that you don't put yourself in a situation that can just be frustrating.
One of the best things that I've done, and I know other investors do, is they have the lease agreement and they sit down and they go over all of the house rules with the guest. And so you're sitting there with them in person, or you could do it digitally, going line item by line item, and you're talking it out. and then they're signing at the end. And so you've had this conversation, right? You can leverage that down the road. And then you said something earlier, you have to go by what you guys agreed upon. Because I've learned in this business, if you give an inch, people will often try and take a mile. And so you're not a bad person from the property management standpoint, whether it be house hacking, long-term rental, short-term rental, if you stick to the agreement that you and your tenant came to before they moved in. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Ryan. The clear expectations and then actually holding true to those when times arise where you have to really makes management pretty darn easy, as long as you get the right tenant on the front end. And so what are some things you do from the screening process to make sure that you have the right person moving in with you? Because it's kind of a big deal. They're your roommate.
Yes, great question. One of the big things with house hacking is that you have more flexibility in how you can screen your tenants because you are owner occupying the unit. So you can pretty much hand pick your tenants when you are house hacking, and that's something that you typically can't do with a property that you are not owner occupying. That being said, when you buy a property that you are house hacking, you are often inheriting tenants, especially as you get into the more conventional small multifamily properties, duplex, triplex, fourplex. You are often inheriting tenants, so you need to be aware of what that lease in place is. So you know what you're getting into, and you want to learn how those existing tenants were screened. But as it pertains to screening tenants, what I personally do is I have my credit score that I have as a requirement. For me, it's 660. That could be dependent on the market you're in, what kind of property you're buying. But for me, that's what that number is. I also have income verification to verify that they are employed, that they are able to pay the rent, and that their income is sufficient for that. A very common number for that will either be 3 times the rent or 2.5 times the rent. And then I also just verify that they do not have any felonies and run a background check on them. And that is how I make sure that I am getting a good tenant in place and it's going to be a good fit. But like I said, you have a lot more ability to hand pick tenants when you're owner occupying a property, which is another benefit, is you get your first round of tenants in there, and they should be a better fit. They should be a fantastic fit.
It's like the old saying when you're hiring somebody, hire slow, fire fast. Take your time, get the right person, put the things in place that Ryan just said, the credit score, the income verification, verify no felonies, and interview these folks. You have a large say in who's going to live with you compared to if it was just your rental property that isn't owner occupied. So make sure, go with the gut check, have conversations with them, go have coffee with them, whatever the case may be, to make sure you feel comfortable moving forward. Because if you can find that right person, we know that financially it's going to make sense on the back end. What was your biggest lesson learned from your initial foray into house hacking?
I would say that my biggest lesson that I learned was making sure that I was thorough with letting tenants know what expectations are. So for one example, I have the fourplex I was house hacking. When I initially bought that property, the tenant, probably 3 weeks after I bought the place above me, had mentioned that her bathtub was draining slowly. And my lease that I'd used in the past and that I use for tenants states that any plumbing stoppages are the responsibility of the tenant. I had no clear expectation with that because I was working on an existing lease though from the prior owner, and it was not clear as to what was going to happen in that circumstance. So the bathtub was draining slowly. Wanted to start out on a good foot anyway, so I just said, hey, I'll take care of it. And I guess another lesson with that is learning to stick to your rules because you have them in place. And one of my rules has always been, even prior to that property, was I will not touch plumbing and I will not touch electrical for liability reasons. I just don't want to touch them. I am not what I would consider a handy person, but I know I could probably go to the hardware store, get a drain snake, and snake that bathtub drain. I was so close to doing it, but that was my first time I was ever tempted to break one of my rules. So her bathtub's draining slowly. I know I can probably fix it, or I can pay someone $200, $300, $400 to come out and snake a bathtub drain. I was so close to doing it on my own, but instead I opted to stick to my guns, stick to my rules, pay someone to come out and do it. I paid someone to come out and do it, and I'm very glad I did, because when they did so, a connection that was evidently becoming loose, there was no indication of a leak at the time, but it was evidently becoming loose, came completely apart when they were snaking that bathtub drain. Same thing would have happened if I had done it. And what they do to test how well it's draining afterwards is they fill the bathtub with water. They had not known that that connection had come loose. They filled the bathtub with water, an entire bathtub full of water. From the unit above mine, went through the access panel, went through my ceiling, flooded the floor, flooded my bathroom. And because I hired someone else to come out and do that, it was on them. They end up writing me a $6,000 check to fix my bathroom and take care of it. Whereas if I had done that myself, that would have been out of my own pocket. So I would say setting those expectations with tenants and knowing that in those situations, you know who the responsibility falls on, and then also sticking to your rules because you have them in place for a reason. Don't be tempted to save $200-300 in those circumstances. You have them in place for a reason. Stick to it, and at some point, you will be very happy that you did.
That's a fantastic story. Make sure that those contractors have insurance, because if not, then you may would have ended up paying that bill. But it was so smart that you put those in place. Here's why in real estate, logic is so much more important than emotion, because you made those rules out of logic. You sat and thought, all right, by the book, what should I do? What shouldn't I do? And why? Then you get in a situation and emotion starts to take over. I could help this lady out. I could get this fixed quick. I can maybe save a few bucks. And a lot of people will go and do that because it's just an off-the-cuff decision. But you went back and you said, okay, I said that I'm not doing this for these particular reasons. Let me call somebody. It's probably going to cost me more money. It's going to take a little bit more time. But I decided to do it for a reason. And it turns out you saved a ton of money and a lot of time as well by sticking to your guns and doing things by the book. Look, I tell folks, I'm an investor. I'm not a contractor. I'm not a handyman. I'm not a landlord. I am an investor. And when you start tying yourself up in things like fixing all your properties, doing all your work, well, then it takes your time away from being able to go and find the next deal and focus on things that you can to increase revenue, increase cash flow, increase appreciation. And so let's stay focused on what our job is and let the professionals in each of their fields handle their thing. Let a property manager manage the property. Let contractors go and fix the property, so on and so forth. And that's a fantastic story of you doing that, Ryan. So what does your portfolio look like today?
Yep. So I have 7 doors in my portfolio, and 6 of them were acquired through house hacking. So the small duplex, the property with a mother-in-law unit is converted to a duplex that I initially bought, and then the 4plex were acquired through house hacking. And that is how I have built the foundation for my portfolio, is through house hacking.
So explain how that unfolds over time, because that's pretty interesting. You're 7 doors now, and 6 of those were house hacking. How does that evolve? And then we'll take it a step further to see how have you maximized cash flow in each of those over time.
Yeah. When it comes to maximizing cash flow, my now wife, Jenny, had heard some about midterm rentals. She also was a house hacker. So prior to us being together, she was a house hacker, and she had used the short-term rental strategy and Airbnbs to maximize cash flow on some of her house hacks. She'd done it a few times over. So collectively, between the two of us, we have a pretty good amount of experience with house hacking. But she had started learning about midterm rentals, and that 4plex at the time, we had just moved out of it, was cash flowing a little over $100 per door. And I was looking to optimize that and increase that. We learned about the midterm rental strategy, and what we did is we initially switched one of the units over to a midterm rental just to test it out. And then over time, we have switched all 4 units over and have increased our cash flow on that property to over $500 per door, which has been fantastic.
That's unbelievable. So you're making $100 per door on that quadplex as long-term rentals. And then you start bringing in what? Nurses, contract workers? Who did you guys reach out to come be those midterm rentals in those properties?
Yeah, our primary guest that we most often host is the travel medical professionals. We have a large hospital in the area that brings in a lot of travelers. I also have had some guests that have just moved to the area. So I've done some networking with realtors, and I also get some leads through some platforms for people that just moved to the area and they need temporary housing. So I had a stay last year. They moved to the area. They were building a new house. Initially, it was about 2 months out for that house to get done. Not a shocker. It took longer for it to get done. They end up staying for 4 or 5 months. So people that just moved to the area, people that are traveling medical professionals, and then also insurance claims. I've had a few guests that were insurance claims. They were displaced from their home due to things like a house fire or a flood. So you can network with realtors, network with insurance agents, and then also there are some platforms that you can list these kind of properties on.
On the previous episode, I had Jesse Vasquez, who you and I both know. He's big into the midterm rental space, and he, rents to healthcare professionals, contractors, and then people with insurance claims. And he said a statistic last week. I was re-listening to the episode. It blew my mind. He said every 88 seconds, someone is displaced from their home through, I think, either flood, fire, wind damage, something. Every 88 seconds in the United States. And so there's people looking for places to live and insurance companies looking to hand money over to property owners who can house those folks until they can get placed into a new home. And that midterm strategy is amazing. How did you transition your properties from house hacking into being just a traditional rental? And then obviously you got into the midterm space, but what does that look like? Do you have to do anything different with the loans? Do you have to refinance out of anything? Do you get capped with how many properties you can do? What did that process look like?
So you don't have any cap. Different jurisdictions may have regulations on furnished rentals, but what we did is just as tenants naturally moved out of the property, so that fourplex, they're 2-bed, 1-bath units. Typically people don't stay in those units for 10, 15 years like you will see in single family houses. So we had a tenant that had moved out, a long-term tenant that had moved out. We switched one unit over, furnished it. So that's something you have to keep in mind as an additional expense when you are converting properties to this is you're gonna have that cost of furnishing that unit, and that can range from anywhere I'd say on the low end of $8,000 to $10,000 to on the high end if you're doing a house, it could be $20,000, $30,000. But these are two bedroom, 1-bath units. It was about $10,000 for us to switch all of them over, and we just did it as tenants moved out naturally. So we'd have a tenant move out, we would fix it up, improve the property, and bring it to the level that's expected of travel medical professionals, and furnish them, and then list them on sites like Furnish Finder and Airbnb, and gear that towards midterm guests. And one thing you have to be aware of is possible regulations in your market. That is a big pro to midterm rentals compared to short-term rentals is you do not in most jurisdictions have as many regulations that are going to slow you down or prevent you from doing that.
Did you have to refinance though out of your original house hack loan to then turn it into midterm, or no? Like you were able to keep everything the same, put tenants in place, and then you were able to go buy your next house hack?
I did not have to do a refinance. One thing you have to be aware of is when you're using an owner-occupant loan, for every one of those loan products that I'm aware of, you have to have the intent to live in the property for a year. So you're not going to be able to convert that unit over right away. You're going to have to wait until you are moving out of that, which for me was about 1.5 years. But no need to refinance for anything like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, is make sure you are following the lender's rules on that. Do not get caught up in any funky stuff where you're saying you're going to live there, but you really don't. That's a good way to get in trouble, and that's quite frankly the wrong thing to do. Another interesting thing that just hit me, and I know it's not always viable, but if you live in your primary home, at least as the laws state today, 2 out of the last 5 years, when you go to sell it, you don't pay capital gains on the profit. And so I'm just thinking out loud here, if you're house hacking and you could stay in those properties at least 2 years, well, within a 5-year time period, you could sell that, scale into something larger with that profit and not pay any capital gains on it. That's insane. I don't know why I've never thought of that before, but we just made house hacking even cooler right here on this show, right? Am I missing something there, Ryan? That should be spot on, right?
You are correct. The one thing, the one detail I bring up with that, from now I'm not a CPA, anything like that, but from what I have heard with that is you will only be able to avoid capital gains based on the percentage of the property that you are owner occupying. So if I buy a duplex, live in it for 2 out of 5 years, and I'm renting out that other unit, I think that I will only save on capital gains on that 50% of the property that I'm owner occupying. But that's still an incredible benefit to house hacking, even if you do that. It's just not typically going to be that full capital gain savings.
That's a great point. If you're in a single family, you get the full savings, but also caveat, there is a cap. Now that I'm thinking about it, my brain's spinning over here. There is a cap for how much profit they'll allow you to take untaxed. And then once you pass that, they're going to tax you. But it's still a huge benefit. Either way, anytime we can pay less money to Uncle Sam, sign me up, tell me what to do, because I want to keep more money in my pocket. So has real estate had the impact on your life financially that you thought it would when you first started and you were all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed?
100%. That doesn't mean it hasn't been difficult. That doesn't mean it's all sunshine, rainbows, and butterflies. There are things that you learn with it. Fortunately, I've learned most of those lessons the easy way, just like I'd mentioned earlier with that water situation at that fourplex. But it's given me a lot of flexibility and freedom. And what house hacking does is it gives you the ability to be aggressive moving forward in other areas of your life, because you're playing good defense first. I think for a lot of people, the biggest thing that you can do starting out is to play defense before you get aggressive and play offense. And when you are acting from a position of strength, it gives you the ability to go out and take other risks in life, or go out and do things that you want that you otherwise aren't able to do, because you're coming from a position of strength. So, you buy a property that you house hack and you lower your housing expense significantly, that is going to have more of an impact on your life in the short term than going out and buying a property that's going to cash flow $150 a month, because you were saving $1,000 on your mortgage or whatever that amount is. And another thing that I really like about house hacking is that your sacrifice your level of sacrifice can significantly impact the return, which you cannot really see in other investment vehicles. If I'm going to rent by the room and increase that sacrifice, I'm going to get a better return than if I buy a side-by-side duplex. And with that, you're not going to have that opportunity in other investment vehicles. To increase your ROI with other investment vehicles, you are typically going to have to increase your risk level. So to get better return, you're going to have to do something that involves more risk, or you're going to have to increase your time and your effort into that deal. With house hacking, I can just increase that level of sacrifice and move that lever to increase my return. Not to get off on a tangent there, but
no, that's good stuff. And you said something, you said playing good defense. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot recently with real estate, is based on data. We know that if you own real estate over time, based on history, you're going to win from an appreciation standpoint. It's going most likely, unless you're just buying a terrible area, but from a macro view, real estate is going to go up in value over time. And so when we get into the real estate game, we have to learn how to buy it so that we can win over time. But I think one of the most important things you can do is mitigate risk, or like you said, play defense. So how do we get into this game that has risk, because all investment has risk, but lower that risk as much as possible while having the largest impact on our life as quickly as possible? And when you think about the different strategies, house hacking has to come up close to the top of one of the best ways to mitigate risk while giving yourself a ridiculous amount of upside and a ton of autonomy with your time very quickly. I look at you, I know Ryan, I know his life, and he's being very modest and kind here by not bragging, but Ryan lives all over the world all the time because he can, because of real estate. I think he's in Minnesota right now, but you may talk to him next week, and he's down in Florida for 2 months, and then he's in Austin, Texas for 3 months, and then he wants to go to Switzerland to ski or whatever he wants to do. This is real life because of the decisions and the sacrifice he made over the last few years through house hacking, and then after house hacking, optimizing those existing units that he got into with very little money down to increase cash flow by changing strategies to midterm, and then continuing to do that over and over and over again. He literally can pretty much do what he wants. And we're not talking about a massive portfolio here. We're talking about 7 doors, which is still a very, very good portfolio. But you hear some of these guys, they got 100, 200,000 of doors. Ryan's over here living the life of his dreams with 7 doors because he optimized and did it the right way.
Yeah, it's given me a lot of flexibility. I think that there are two things that if people can optimize this, it just gives them so much more flexibility. The biggest costs for everyone are taxes, housing, and your car payment. Taxes you can only do so much with. Obviously, there's tax advantages that can come with owning real estate, but as it pertains to your active income, you can only do so much with that. Housing is that big expense that you can control that lever. And if you can control that, and your transportation expense, your car expense, not having a car payment for me, and having no housing payment essentially has given me a lot more flexibility to do exactly what you just said, which is travel. And if you are willing to make those sacrifices, you can have just so much more abundance in other parts of your life.
So you're telling me you did what Rich Dad did and you bought assets and got rid of liabilities and now your life is amazing? Wow. Can
Shocker.
You believe it? It actually works. Hey, do you attribute the success you've had to talent or hard work?
Mostly hard work, definitely. I'm nothing special as it pertains to talent. I put my head down and I work, and I'm willing to make sacrifices, and it's given me a better life than I would have imagined just 3, 4, 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, because of those sacrifices and because of that hard work.
Such a modest answer from a modest, amazing guy. He's talented too. Don't let him fool you. But Ryan, thank you for being on the show today. I love your story. You've crushed it. Where can people find you if they want to ask you some questions and pick your brain on house hacking?
Yeah, I'm definitely most active on Instagram, and on there you can find me at Burnham, which is BURNHAM _Ryan. Burnham _Ryan is my name on Instagram.
Love it. And I'm honored to have Ryan on our team here at our company. A gem of a guy. Ryan, thank you for being on today. Thank you for listening. We'll talk to you next time.
Appreciate you having me on.
Thank you for tuning in to the Rich Dad Real Estate Show today. I'm your host, Jaren Sustar. If you haven't done so already, go down to the show notes and grab my free ebook, How to Buy Your First Investment Property. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.